Price is Right.
We're like a talk show. We're back.
Yeah. Okay, this meeting is being live streamed. Okay, we've got that. Okay, we are live, and this is Senate Finance. And as part of our 101, we're going to ask Chris Delia to come in and talk to us a little bit about the banks and banking industry in Vermont and
Sure.
things you're seeing.
Sure.
Impacts all the new interest rates are having.
Yeah, happy to, Madam Chair. For the record, Chris Delia, President of Vermont Bankers Association, thank you for the opportunity. I will be mindful of your time today, so I can speed up as quickly as you would like. It's also great that we have 3 members of the Senate Economic Development Committee here as well, because I think this can be beneficial to your work over there.
We're trying. We ended up having DFR in both committees on the same day for essentially the same presentation.
Right.
So we're trying to find a way. I'd love to have Vermont Housing Finance in here, because they had great things to say, but the 3 of us, so I'm thinking maybe we'll set up some Zoom tutorials going both ways for the missing member, or the members, because to get it twice is hard for the presenters, and it's hard.
But it was great. Listening to more this morning was just great.
Oh,
And the
she
work
was
that they're doing over there was
fantastic.
super. So, and some of my meetings that I've had over the last year, 2 years, I think would be informative for your discussions on equity and so on.
Great.
Because I've outreached to a number of groups to figure out what are the issues and how do we do a better job of getting into those communities that you were hinting at.
Right. And that is a shared conversation about access to capital.
Yes.
Yeah.
It is.
Great.
Super.
Yeah.
So again, thank you for inviting me in. Since you folks really know us, I'm going to go through some of this very quickly and then really open it up for questions that you might have. I'm going to jump to page 3 because I think it's always good for you to understand what's the landscape of the banks in Vermont. Quickly, we're a membership-based organization, trade organization, advocacy, education, products and services. Those are our bailiwicks for the association. But what I really wanted to get to are the membership that we have. So 25 member banks, 7 of those are state chartered banks. That means they're controlled by DFR. And we work under DFR's regulatory oversight. And 18 of those are nationally chartered. Even though they're nationally chartered, many of them are headquartered in Vermont, and I'll touch upon that in a minute, but they work with their national regulators. We got our first new bank last year. It's the first one we got since 1989. And I kind of think about, they're probably looking at 4 years ago when the idea came up to look at starting a bank, and they launched it during a pandemic. Quite an interesting time to do it, unexpected, but we hear good things. 80 million in asset size to well over 10 billion plus. 80 million would be our good friend Mark Young in Orwell, whose son is now running the institution, and obviously the 10 billion plus are the M&Ts and the TDs of the world. I would suggest to you that there's a need for all size institutions in Vermont, because each one has a uniqueness to it. But just by way of example, my smaller institutions, even when you get up to the billion, 2 billion range, would not be able to provide the services to some of our larger institutions in Vermont, whether it's the state colleges working with UVM, VHFA, VITA, et cetera. They just don't have the scale that's needed to work with those organizations. So to have our larger institutions in Vermont is very important, as well as the work that they do in the communities and meeting the needs of their customers. Vermont-based institutions, we have a significant number of them, whether it's People's Trust in St. Albans, Brattleboro Savings and Loan, Union Bank, Community National Bank. But we also have a number who are multi-state institutions that are not headquartered here. So a Bar Harbor Bank and Trust over in Maine. We have Berkshire Bank out of Massachusetts. We have Mascoma Bank out of New Hampshire, Claremont Savings Bank out of New Hampshire. And then the MBT up in Burlington and M&T are both out of New York.
So
And that-
TD is not like a.
And well, TD would be out of Canada,
Yeah, I didn't even know where they were based. They're based out of
Yeah.
Canadian.
Montreal.
Toronto.
Toronto.
Yeah.
But they work with you. You're.
Oh, yeah, all of the banks that have a physical presence in Vermont are members of the association. So they all work with us, yes.
And how long's M&T been here?
M&T's only been here since last fall. It was People's United Bank out of Connecticut.
Okay.
People's United had purchased Chittenden in the marketplace. And one of the benefits we got out of that was retaining of significant back office operations because the leadership that went to Connecticut came out of Vermont. So we kept a lot of jobs in back office operations. That's changing a little bit.
And M&T is from where? Sorry.
New York.
This is a new one for me.
New York,
Okay.
Yeah.
So they acquired Peoples
that's correct.
and, okay.
We also have two independent trust companies. So from time to time, the committees of jurisdiction deal with trust statutes.
Yeah.
And I can tell you that there'll be a proposal coming in this session. We've been working with the Bar Association, the probate courts, on a rewrite of one of the trust statutes, adopting a uniform code. Everybody's on board with it, so we're expecting it to hit the judiciary committees, and hopefully there'll be smooth sailing with that. About 240 branches around Vermont, 2,800 employees plus, average wage of just over 48,000, and a fairly extensive benefit packages, which our folks take pride in, because I know there's lots of discussions about benefit packages in Vermont, and they really range. There's a broad spectrum of packages that are offered. This is no surprise to you because these other entities have certainly touched upon this committee. But like insurance and healthcare, we are one of the most heavily regulated industries in this country. And rightly so, when you look at the work that we do, the information we have, and providing services to our customers. Those regulations exist both at the state and federal level, and I'll go into that in a little bit more, but the big buckets for regulation fall into depository and lending regulations. However, in Vermont, we're subject to Title IX consumer protection statutes. That's not the case in some other states across the country. Their consumer protection statutes do not apply to the industry in some of those states. So in Vermont, it does. Obviously, privacy regulations are very important to us. I think we're going to have a conversation this year about a proposal from the Attorney General's office, even to things like service member protection. We have a whole block of regulations that we must adhere to when we're working with the service members in the military, either active or retired, in a lot of different avenues, if you will. So primary regulators, whether it's DFR or some others that I'm going to talk about in a minute, responsible for supervising, monitoring, inspecting, examining, et cetera. This is all about making sure that institutions are complying with the regulations and we're functioning in a safe and sound manner. And that's extremely important. And we take great pride when we look back on the financial crisis in 2008, 2009 timeframe. We did not have one problem bank in the state of Vermont. We had, I think, maybe one problem bank in New England all told. But you look at other states that were just hemorrhaging: Georgia, Florida, Nevada, California, were losing banks right and left.
Didn't do exotic mortgages.
Yeah, and not just our industry, but mortgage brokers who were out there in the marketplace. It was a very stupid time, if you will, technical term. But we came through it very, very well in Vermont. I'm proud of the way the banks function. So who are the regulators briefly? Because I know you're familiar with DFR, and they regulate our state financial institutions, state chartered institutions. But we also have the FDIC, Federal Deposit Insurance Corp, that came out of the Great Depression because a lot of people lost money during the Great Depression. And I'm sure you're familiar with $250,000 coverage on your accounts these days. That's what the amount is. So you can have a state chartered bank that's regulated by DFR and also subject to regulations by FDIC. You can also have a state chartered bank that's regulated by the Federal Reserve. And they play a function of obviously the ACH system, how money transmits back and forth amongst institutions and customers. They're also an access to liquidity. If we needed to get capital in the marketplace, we can borrow short-term at their window. So as a state chartered bank, I can choose to be regulated by DFR, and I can choose either FDIC or the Federal Reserve. And it just depends on the rules and regulations that are governing, and honestly, the attitude of the regulator, and how they view working with the institution. If you're a nationally chartered bank,
We've got a question.
yes, please.
And the bank gets to choose who to be regulated?
Well, the bank can choose, but they have to go through a process to switch their regulators. And I haven't heard of one that's been denied switching. In fact, I just had 2 switch from the FDIC to the Federal Reserve over the last year. Yeah. If you're a nationally chartered bank, it's the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency. They're the ones that implement the national regulations that are governing the banks. But again, like a National Bank of Middlebury, Community National Bank in town, they're OCC, but they're also FDIC regulated as well. We then have the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau that came out of Dodd-Frank, which passed in 2010. That is the overarching bureau for consumer protection now as it relates to our industry. Many will say, well, it's designed to hit the larger institutions of billions of dollars and over. And the reality is all of the work that the CFPB does trickles down to the smaller institutions as well. So we all feel like we're regulated by them, and they are looking very closely at a lot of initiatives over the last few years. You have the FFIEC, that's the Federal Financial Institutions Examination Council. They work with the regulators on examination processes. If I'm a state chartered bank or a nationally chartered bank, on a 12-month or 18-month or 2-year basis, my regulators will come in and do an examination of my institution. It might be on a safety and soundness 1 year. It might be on a Bank Secrecy Act the next year. We also have the benefit of DFR and the FDIC coordinating on our state charters so that they alternate, so that you're not getting inundated with regulators coming in. And sometimes it might be 6 regulators showing up at your door, and other times it might be 15 regulators showing up at your door. And you can imagine everything kind of comes to a halt because you've got to answer a lot of questions and provide a lot of data to them. But it's rightly so. We should be regulated again, given the work that we're doing. Securities and Exchange Commission, I included in that because if you are a stock bank, you also need to adhere to the Securities and Exchange regulations. So you, as a stock bank, as a nationally chartered institution, could have 3 or 4 regulators that you need to work with. And then I threw in the FTC, Federal Trade Commission, because we found over the years they have areas of jurisdiction that impact us as well.
But remembering my history classes, there was a whole series of bank failures run on banks.
Oh, yes.
And since we've done this, I haven't heard of a run on the bank.
No, what we see in the marketplace, let me rephrase this. If I were to give you my presentation on the history of banking that I provide to students at our banking school, when we get into the 20th and 21st century, I talk about all of the rules and regulations that have developed out of the crisis. Starting back in 1913 with the Federal Reserve, we go to the 30s, we get into the 50s and 60s, 70s, 80s, and so on. And there is such a large volume of regulations that were created to limit the crises, the bank failures, but more importantly, protect the consumers in the marketplace. And the volume of regulations is staggering. And they're all in play, or they've been updated to reflect today's environment, today's time frame. So, we often get into conversations about, do we need more regulations? Are regulations good? Regulations are meant to serve a purpose. And often we're not anti-regulation. We want to just make sure it's good regulation so that we can conduct business and meet the needs of the customers. So it's not only down to the work that you do here at the legislature and what Congress does, but the bottom half of the page that on page 6 that deals with supervisory guidance. This is all about the rules that are developed with the regulators that get promulgated. So it could be interpretations, guidance, interagency statements, advisories, et cetera. And the best example of that would be the Dodd-Frank bill. The Dodd-Frank bill in 2010 was a few hundred pages long. The regulations that came out of it were over 22,000 pages. So it's not only what's in the statute, it's also the rulemaking authority that goes into it. You're familiar with giving agencies and entities in Vermont rulemaking authorities. So
Well, some of us are also familiar with Dodd-Frank and then the changes in the regulations and what did it mean, and it was a long play out.
right. And the challenge is the dust never settles. If I were to look at our industry over the last 10 years, and you especially see this with changes in administration down at the federal level, you're going in one direction, you're focusing on a certain implementation strategies, and then all of a sudden changes occur within administrations, and now you're tasked with going in a different direction. And you're continually retooling yourselves, depending quite honestly on how the political winds are blowing and who sits in the leadership positions in some of these regulatory agencies. It's mind-blowing. And if I were a compliance officer in a bank, I don't know how they do it these days. It's quite staggering. That said, there's meaning behind the regulations and purpose behind them. So it's not just what you do here, it's everything else that goes with it. And as the finance committee, I mean, you know us all too well. You're the jurisdiction for the banking industry. You work on the statutes that regulate the industry, whether it's Title 8, sometimes Title 9. But as I said to Commerce yesterday, I've been in every committee in the bill because there's always some piece of legislation or several pieces of legislation that you pop up and you have to go into healthcare or human services or other committees that they're looking at a particular issue that's important to the industry. And I think in part, that's why this job is so interesting over 20 years that I've been doing. I never know where I'm going to end up thanks to you folks.
I said yesterday, if you say the word, put a lien on, it'll get Chris Deal.
Oh, I'll be here. Yeah, I'll be here. Or somebody will flag me in the hallway and say, did you hear what they're doing to you? And I'll be there. So it is interesting. And again, with 3 of you being on the Economic Development Committee, there's a lot of cross-pollination there because you look at issues that are important to us over there as well as every other committee. Very briefly, you know my role. I'm an advocate, I'm a lobbyist. I said to this Commerce Committee, and one of my colleagues is a lobbyist and was giving me some grief. He said, I hear you're here to help. And we want good public policy, but we want public policy that allows us to continue to meet the needs of our consumers in the marketplace. So when we get into some of the discussions that occur in the building, we might say, well, wait a second, let me share with you the existing regulations that are already governing the work that we do. And here's why we don't want another overlay on top of what we're doing today. And I think privacy is going to be a really good example of that. We have extensive statutes at the federal level that require us to meet privacy concerns in the marketplace. We're well beyond a lot of entities out there. We also have in rules in DFR a requirement as far as privacy is concerned, where we are opt-in. You have to affirmatively opt in before I can do anything with your data. Many states are an opt-out when it comes to the banking industry. So we're already ahead of the game there. So we'll get further
I
into privacy.
remember going through something with you where we needed data and there was no guarantee that if you were, and it may even have been the tax department, but it was your privacy regulations were stricter
Correct.
than where we were asked. And it was probably health and welfare, and it was probably somewhere in human services,
Yeah.
but try to.
Yeah, because we were asked to look at, we had to do some verification on customers' accounts for the Agency of Human Services.
And it was a real privacy, because our privacy requirements were nowhere near yours, but if we leaked, you were in big trouble.
Correct. And again, you can imagine, we've got name, address, social security numbers, we've got your account information, you know, whatever else we've needed in our systems. And all of that is protected behind umpteen firewalls and technology to make sure that we limit as much vulnerability as possible. It's never 100% guaranteed. There are cyber threats every day that are attacking our institutions in Vermont and across the country, but privacy is a leading issue for our institutions to make sure our customers feel secure in what we have. So, you know, joking aside with my colleague, my goal is to make sure we develop good public policy for our industry, for our customers. There are times, as I said in Congress, I got to die on the sword and say, no, I can't do it. I can't go there. But most of the time I try and find solutions because we want it to work for the parties involved. And I come at it from a willingness to negotiate and be open-minded in the work that we do for the association. What I also wanted to share with you today is on page 8, because I think this is something for you folks to be mindful of. And it really deals with the dramatic changes that we're seeing in the marketplace when people access financial services. And this has been happening for a period of time. Some of the names on there might be familiar to you, but the reality of banking or financial services today is a lot of folks are doing it on this device right here. They're doing it on laptops, they're doing it on their tablets or their phones. And I can go home tonight and I can look at my accounts. I can transfer money in between accounts. I can pay my bills online. I can open up an account online. If I had investments, I could look at those. I can shop for a mortgage tonight if I wanted to, and get plenty of offers on a mortgage from folks that aren't in Vermont, maybe a few in Vermont as well. If I wanted to get a business loan, I could go online and get this, whether it was for equity purposes or for debt purposes. So the marketplace has changed. And we look at the players that are out there now, like DFR does, and you think about, okay, it's no longer just walking down State Street here and seeing all the banks or the credit unions on Main Street or State Street. It's now everybody that's out there in the ether that's providing services to Vermonters or trying to get them to be customers. So you look at this and you look at the lending piece, and Lending Club or Cabbage or On Deck or Rocket Mortgage, which is one of the leading mortgage providers in the state of Vermont. They're all out there online, and I can tap into their services. Very different than what we used to do going down to the local bank or credit union. Personal finance, Credit Karma, Mint, Hello Wallet, those are all helping me manage my finances. Now, Mint takes all of my accounts from various sources and cobbles it together, and I can manage it that way. Hello Wallet, similar. Payments, you know, it's no longer just going into the cafeteria up here and having a card reader. It's now doing the farmer's market and having a little square that I attach to my phone or my tablet, or using PayPal, or one of the many other ways of transmitting payments. My daughters who will go out, especially my youngest one, if there's 5 or 6 of them going out to dinner and nobody's got cash, but one's got a debit card or a credit card, everybody's Venmoing that person their cost for the dinner and not even going to an ATM machine to get the money out.
Well, you left off Apple Pay where you can just
Oh,
pay with
Apple
your
Pay,
phone.
exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, and there's all kinds of entities in the marketplace that are playing within the payments system, that it's changed dramatically. We're now going to see rolled out from the Federal Reserve, and the Federal Reserve in Boston has been managing this, a real-time payment system, so that you're going to see transactional activities happening in real time and impacting your accounts in real time, beyond what we've got today. So it's changing dramatically, and then the equity financing piece I put down there as well. So from a financial institution, some of the things that we think about in this changing marketplace is one of fairness, if you will. If they're doing exactly everything we're doing, how are they being regulated in the marketplace? Is it meeting the same regulatory requirements? Again, from a safety and soundness perspective, from a fair equity and lending perspective, from a consumer privacy perspective. The next thing we're thinking about is investments in technology. Because if this is the direction that the markets are moving in, and it's not just a younger demographic, it's many people across the board. But if this is the direction that we're moving in, our banks need to be thinking about investing in technology. They're not as nimble as some of these startups who develop apps and launch those apps in the marketplace. I think if I remember a few years ago, before the pandemic, we had a conversation in here about the sandbox. And allowing fintech companies to roll out into the marketplace in a well-defined sandbox that was controlled by DFR and looked at to ensure that it was being done in a productive way for the market and to protect consumers. That's still very much a discussion out there with the regulators.
I know we are going to have a money transfer bill,
Yes,
but it's
you will.
going to be looking at cryptocurrency,
Yes.
which is the newest thing. I mean, I was feeling really good. I think the only bill I actually write is my rent and my car insurance once a year.
Yeah.
Everything else is direct payment.
Yep.
Yeah, I don't even carry my checkbook anymore,
Right.
which I never went anywhere without.
Which
One of
is,
the things that we should be looking at as a committee, and maybe you all, is as we talk with DFR, talk about the changes in technology to ensure, are there any holes in terms of how many of these new technologies that are affecting Vermonters' finances are being regulated, and to indicate those that perhaps are not.
I mean, somebody got all my vital information to put in the claim to unemployment. And there were several state people that had that happen.
Right.
I don't know where the breach was. I know my bank has all kinds of
yeah, and so
things on there
that's,
to make sure no one gets into my
Right.
account.
but that leads us at some point into the whole privacy discussion.
Yeah.
Because when you start looking at who's implementing privacy measures and security measures compared to who's not, we're subject to the weakest link out there. I mean, our banks can do all they can to protect your data, but if I go down the block and I swipe my card at some establishment and my data somehow gets compromised, that's a problem for me as well as a problem for the institution. So at this point, all of us in the marketplace have a responsibility to privacy and some form of protection of consumer data. It's a question of what's the right level, because the mom and pop's not going to have the robust systems we do.
Yeah.
But if the mom and pop is using one computer to surf online and go through their private emails and then using it for business purposes, I think you need to firewall that off at a fairly inexpensive cost to that. But that's a whole nother topic of discussion. The other thing on privacy you just alluded to, which is very important. We part of the bill, I think you're going to see at some point on privacy, deals with biometric data. Biometric data can also include artificial intelligence. And when I think about that, we think about the transactional activities that you're involved with. So if we know that Ann Cummings on a monthly basis pays these things, pick 5 items, but all of a sudden we start to see blips, California, Texas, overseas, or whatever, that's going to prompt us from a fraud perspective to outreach to you and say, Ann, is this something that you did? And I got it today. I had to make flight arrangements for a flight tomorrow. And I got a ping from my credit card company texting me a code text back, is this an authorized transaction? And that's how we're using it to prevent fraud.
That's better.
Oh, great.
We were traveling in Georgia and somebody used my husband's credit card to buy $300 worth of liquor in California.
Yeah,
So they put a freeze on the card. Fortunately, I had my card and
Yeah.
we were able to function. But I always called in. Now they tell me they know where I go.
well, I'm old school like you, and I call in and I let my credit card companies and my bank know where I'm
I'm
going.
going here next weekend. If you
Right.
start seeing, some charges, that's me. But yeah, you do regularly now get, somebody changed your password. If that were you, don't worry about it. But if it wasn't you, let us know.
Now, here's the problem you can run into in the marketplace. The fraudsters know that as well.
Oh, yes.
And they'll send you the email or the text. It's got the same imaging, the same messaging from your company that you do business with. And I'll give you the crypto fraud example because you raised crypto. So a customer in Southern Vermont, this happened to a few, but they were able to talk the others off the shelf, but one didn't. They get a message from their bank. It looks like their bank. It's got the logo and everything from their bank. You have a problem with your account. You need to go take $9,000 out of your account, go to a crypto ATM machine in Keene, New Hampshire, deposit the money in the account, in the machine. It will route back to your account and that will correct the problem. And the person did it.
Wow.
And $9,000 is gone. Now they had others come in and, this is what's happening. So I said they were able to talk him out of it. It's a tough conversation because when you get the grandparent scam, that my son or granddaughter's in Canada in jail, you get the internet lover scam that I fly me in, can you wire me some money or whatever else is out there. Sometimes it's very, very difficult to convince those individuals standing in front of you, do not do it.
Do not buy $300.
And unfortunately that, though they are preying on the elderly population in a lot of those instances.
Now, I regularly get somebody's buying a $500 watch on Amazon and they're freezing your account. And I go to my account on Amazon, it's not frozen.
Right.
I have now won prizes from Kohl's, Walmart. There was one other one. I need to sign in and claim my prize.
Right.
All right. Well, they just need my credit card number to cover the shipping costs.
Right.
It comes with the Amazon and the Walmart logo, the whole thing.
Yeah.
And, I had one, this was an email, but it had a constituent's name and it was a really conspicuous name, so I recognized it. And he's traveling and could I do him a favor and go buy a $300 gift card for his niece for Christmas?
Right.
I had him call my house.
Yep.
And I told him, I'm a senator. I'm going to report this to the police. No, this is fine. And can you keep me on the phone while you drive to Walgreens to buy a $500 card to cover the cost of delivering? I won the sweepstakes, the clearinghouse.
Right.
They don't back down. But they're getting very sophisticated.
Well, I was contacted by the daughter of an African dictator who was trying to smuggle $20 million into the United States. And she was gonna give me $2 million if she put it in my account.
On a really large scale, I just
What-
wanted
what-
to, I don't know if it was discussed in this committee when it happened, but you may know that Run Amok Maple, for example, had $250,000 that was intercepted.
Yeah.
Because a criminal enterprise set up a portal that looked exactly like their
Right.
banks. They were supposed to send this money. It was supposed to be secured to their bank.
Right.
And they intercepted the infrastructure and created something that
Yeah.
took the money. And as I understood it at the time, there was absolutely nowhere for them to turn after that. And I don't know if things have changed. I mean, it wasn't an insurance claim they could make. there's no international criminal, investigation that could get them their money back. Is that still happening to companies that are just out of luck? Is there a new?
I'm not aware of any changes that are out there in the market. What we end up doing is working with Secret Service or FBI or other criminal law enforcement agencies, let me put it that way. On the local level, the difficulty is law enforcement's busy with a lot of other things and they just don't have the capacity to deal with some of the fraud activities. But when you get the FBI involved, the challenge that you run into is the fraudsters aren't here.
Right, there is.
And they're somewhere else.
Yeah.
Now, having said that, I learned something very disturbing down in Bennington, is that there's some new fraud activity down in Bennington where people are being targeted and they're told, go get the money from your bank and meet me in X location to give me the money. And this is now a physical presence rather than being somewhere outside the state or in the ether somewhere.
That might look like an office or like a
No,
parking lot.
it's like meet me in the McDonald's parking lot.
Okay.
Yeah,
Well,
and
why would I do
Well,
that? What's the?
it could be related to ransomware, it could be,
Okay,
it
all
could be
right,
some
so I'm
other
gonna eat
means
your
that's going on.
computer if you don't.
I'm gonna guess in the case of like a run amok, and we've heard this before. I could have a little malware sitting on my computer that's just watching everything I do.
Right.
And then once they've learned my interactions and they learn how people are interacting with me to the point of language, to the point of terms, friendliness, if you will, they can construct something that would do
Yeah.
exactly what happened to run amok. And you think you're working with your bank or you
Yeah.
think you're working with XYZ company. And even if you call,
Right. 'cause
it's
now
being
like-
routed
Exactly.
to the fraudster. And so it's very, very difficult
Yeah.
to deal with.
Yeah. Can I ask on a different note, in this world, I mean, I don't think it's any surprise that I care a lot about equity and lending and
Sure.
banking access and,
Sure.
I think in some ways it's a little frightening, this world of internet banking and online lending, but it's also been somewhat of an equalizer for some folks who didn't have the bank on their neighborhood
Yes.
street corner, who, so they walked in and they were all of a sudden seen as not worthy of receiving a loan. And so I just wonder if there is any information that you all are collecting on how much of that is true, whether there is some of these sites that are reputable and become more equitable. There are more people who haven't traditionally received access to capital who are benefiting from these tools, and how you can replicate that so it takes some of the subjectivity out.
Right, so I think DFR would be a better entity to ask the question from a reputable point of view, because if they're a licensed lender, they're going to be the regulator that oversees them. That said, I'll go back to my statement that we, because of the world we operate in and regulations and so on, we're not very nimble. And some of these fintechs who start up can be very nimble. So what we're finding now in today's market, when fintechs 5-10 years ago used to be the competitors, we're now finding partnerships with a lot of the fintechs to do just what you're talking about, because they are able to be more responsive in a quicker time frame. And if we can meet the needs of a marketplace by establishing that partnership, then I've seen banks go ahead and do it. Where, just again, very briefly on the equity piece and the access piece, what I've learned in my conversations, and this is especially with the New American community in the Burlington area, is either a lack of understanding about banking at all, a lack of trust, because in the country that I came from, maybe banking institutions were not good, if you will, or maybe they were state run. And it just paralyzes a lot of folks who don't have the familiarity with the banking system like all of us would. So I'm trying to learn from some of the folks in those communities, what is the best way to approach that obstacle? What's the best way to provide education? And I had one group say the best thing you could do is be available for house parties. And if there's a house party for a segment of the New American population in Burlington, and you have a liaison that you can work with, go out and meet them. Do not wait for them to come in and see you, because they're not going.
No, they're not.
They're just paralyzed. So we hear a lot of the issues that I'm sure we can talk about in your committee. Lending to women-owned businesses was another area of discussion that we've had with folks in Vermont. So
Are you tracking data? Because I'm asking the same thing of the credit unions.
I have no way of tracking that data. The best I could give you would be information on the unbanked in Vermont. That comes from the FDIC
Okay.
data that they collect.
So not how
But I
many
don't
business
think-
loans are going to women or people of color.
I'm not sure of anybody who has that level of granular data at this point.
In your world.
In
'Cause
my world,
I know
there
the
may be
credit unions are supposed to be.
Yeah, there may be other
Yeah.
organizations
Yeah.
that are out there, and I may be able to find, if I could find an aggregated data from the FDIC on that, I'll have to look. I might be able to also get it off of individual call reports, but that's a lot of data to try and comb through for the call report. So let me see if I can find something, but I know that there are other groups trying to collect that type of information now. The only other thing I'll leave you with, Madam Chair, is this is just going to be by way of laundry list, and happy to answer any questions. I mentioned privacy earlier. Workforce development issues are obviously very big for us, as they are big for our customers. Not just finding the workforce, but now let's talk about finding housing for the workforce. I could be the broken record of information
It's
that you
been
heard
a
about.
broken record
this
today
morning.
between economic development.
Right. So housing is another big part of that. I'll just share with you, I've been asked by a number of legislators, Chris, is there money available for housing? Yeah, there's money available if somebody wanted to do, what's the term of putting an apartment over your garage or something?
Oh, an
Accessory
auxiliary
dwelling.
housing.
Thank you, accessory dwelling unit.
Yeah.
If they meet the underwriting criteria of the institution, there's no blocking access to funds for it. What I hear often from my banks is the regulations at the local level, the conflict with zoning regulations, the Act 250s. Yes, we've seen a tremendous increase in the cost of housing, and yes, there are housing projects that don't cash flow, and we appreciate the work that you've done with VHFA and trying to put some programs in place to deal with some of those costs. But housing, obviously, land records is an issue that we focus on because it's very challenging. The state of the land records in Vermont, there's no real uniformity, no consistency, no standards being applied that we can see. We've got some really outstanding clerks, and then we've got some that are challenged to get the job done, whether they don't have the support they need, both in mind and financial. It can be problematic for us, and that's a big part of the work that goes on in housing, being able to get access to land records. Cannabis, I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about cannabis and just mention that, we're still no better off than we have been over the last, say, 3 or 4 years. We have been an advocate with our congressional delegation down in Washington. We absolutely want the SAFE Act to pass. That would allow us to provide financing services or transactional account services to the cannabis industry. Without it, for a lot of our banks, it's just a non-starter. And the reason is quite real. You jeopardize your bank charter. You as management are subject to fines and penalties, could be potential jail time, as well as to board of directors. And there are very few that are willing to go down that road. And state regulators sometimes have a different view than your federal regulators. And I probably leave it at that, but it's still a Schedule I. And as long as it's against the law at the federal level, our hands are tied. We do have one bank that's involved with it, Brattleboro Savings and Loan. They've decided to jump in. They will have a limited appetite, I think no different than what the State Employees Credit Union has kind of put out there in the market with kind of bumping up against their ceiling of how much they want to do. Yes, there are other states in the country that have banks that are providing services, but those are difficult decisions made in boardrooms as to whether they want to go down that road or not. Crypto, finally, crypto. Wow, you know, as I said to the committee yesterday, if I had a couple of $100 and I wanted to, and I didn't mind losing it, you know, dabble in the crypto market. One day I could hit it big and the next day I could lose it all. What we are doing with our banks is to provide education, not to get into the crypto world, but to be mindful of the fact that our customers are already there. And if you are coming in, for example, for a mortgage and your income is based in crypto, how do we underwrite that for that mortgage? What's the value we're placing on that yearly income? If you're trying to settle in a state and the state has crypto assets associated with it, how do we value that in order to correctly do our job in helping to settle that estate? Or if you're providing wealth management services and your clients are dabbling in crypto, again, so we're not educating our banks and saying, get into the crypto market. We're educating them to say, your customers are already there. You better think about how do you start to manage this discussion and valuation proposition internally and provide services.
Yeah. The new world.
It's a very new world, constantly changing.
Yeah, we've come a long way since that you were getting checks from Canada
Yes.
that, yeah, then you sent, the were worth nothing and you'd already sent the $200 and
Right.
yeah,
Yeah.
long way.
So I'll stop there because again, you folks are familiar with this, but those are just some of the highlights. I'm here every day. I guess the final thing I should say, I think you folks know this, but I've always made myself available to legislators. If you have a constituent question or an issue that comes up, what I have found is I can often communicate with the bank. They don't tell me anything. I don't want them to tell me anything. But by brokering the two parties together, often we find an answer to the concerns that were raised by the constituent. And for as much as I love the full employment that you all give me every legislative session, if I can deal with the one-off issues that way, I often don't see it come up in a bill.
Any questions?
Just a clarification, did Vermont banks give any value at all to crypto? If someone comes up, lists that as an asset?
Well, that's the challenge that they're facing right now is how do you value it?
Yeah.
Because is it based on the value that you're seeing today? Because that value could change tomorrow. I mean, we've seen how volatile it is just over the last few weeks.
Yeah.
With the collapse of one in the market, and then everybody else seemed to be going down in value. That's just that's what they're trying to get their arms around is how do you value that?
And then I think I've been told, well, DFR told us, both here and in DC, they're trying to figure out, there's a lot of room for consumer just fraud and violation. And
Right.
how do you regulate it? We regulate securities, we regulate banking. This is online, but it's playing with somebody's money somewhere.
Right.
And what is it and how do they regulate it?
Yep.
So more to come on that.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay,
Great.
thank you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Good seeing you all.
Good seeing you.
How long have you been?
20 years. I've been in the building since 92 because I was with Lamoille Economic Development Corp. And I was the closest to the State House for testifying on economic development issues.
Uh-huh.
And then I went to, I ran VEPSI for a little while, when we actually did long-term planning, before we had the tax credit program.
When you said 20 years, I was like, no, he's been there longer.
Yeah.
That's quite a long sentence.
What?
20 years.
Yeah. Best damn job I ever had, to be honest with you. I really enjoy it. In large part because, again, what you guys do every year is different. It's never boring. Could be frustrating at times, but it's never boring.
Yes. Well, you may see some more changes there this year.
There you go. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Take care.
Okay, committee, that's it. I'm gonna schedule it for 1:30 on Friday unless you object. It's not gonna be this easy.
We
I've
always look
never
forward
seen
to it.
bills. I guess maybe we got dependent on Vince. I remember one day, the first day of the session, he had 86 bills introduced. Cause it's been, and maybe because there is such a turnover.
Yeah.
New people didn't put bills
Yeah,
in,
it's light
assuming
this
they
year,
would,
isn't it?
yeah. So there is a real lag. I just put the housekeeping, the not Bishka, DFR,
Mhm,
housekeeping bill in, which they send over,
mhm.
written, it just,
Yeah.
sometimes they tweak, the style. They told me it'd be a couple weeks. And I've got the merged market report has some legislation
So, if we got so few bills in, why don't we deal with them quickly and adjourn?
that we could do too, except I think there's gonna be a big glut of very expensive
I think
ones.
there are two.
I'm getting, people that now want us to do healthcare and staged approach, and I said,
Oh, goodness.
I've supported, healthcare, but you should know that there's paid family leave and there's universal child care, and the bills on those are hundreds of millions of dollars, and there's no way we can do all. I don't know that there's a way we can, and it's gonna come here.
The money just isn't there.
Yeah, we're gonna be asked to find the money.
We're looking in Franklin County.
I keep offering to buy Jane a printing
That
press.
Civil War rates too.
Randy, what is a will?
Taking Franklin County and making it a tax-free zone, use that as an experiment.
At the air.
That didn't work as a Missouri, but this difference in the state between Chittenden and it hasn't gotten as far as Swan. It's gotten,
Georgia is beginning to.
yeah, St. Albans is looking good, building housing. But you get up into Brighton and Island Pond
I
and,
mean, you get up into Berkshire and.
yeah,
And obviously you get to Richford and
Yeah.
it's a different county, it's a different
yeah,
world.
it's a different world. And what seems very affordable to some people with jobs that have the potential to move you up.
Yeah.
For the folks up there, we aren't seeing it. Broadband's going in, so.
Again, a bit of a glitch though in Franklin County, Franklin Parallel of Oil, because we had that arrangement, they had the arrangement with Google.
Yeah, and it fell
Deal,
through,
and
yeah.
the deal fell through, it wasn't big enough for Google, Google walked away, and so they had to go back. They've got somebody now, and it looks like it's moving along again.
Sounds like you've got Google.
Well, we had Google, they had an arrangement with Google to be in effect the operator. It was very encouraging.
Right.
But then I think Google concluded that the population of potential users was not sufficient to meet their needs, which should have been, I would think, obvious on the surface,
one of the first
and they backed out.
Yeah. No, that's why it isn't there. Yes, we can go offline.